Dan, I'll just quickly take over the screen share.
Okay.
Great. I'll kick things off. So thanks everyone for joining. We're doing a live stream with Dan from NAIC. Maybe I'll let everyone just introduce themselves quickly so people know who they're going to be seeing.
I'll introduce myself. This is Dan Barker. I'm the Chief Architect at the NAIC.
And my name is Douwe Maan. I am the Platform Engineering Manager at GitLab, and I'm going to be guiding Dan through the part of the GitLab code base he's going to have to be modifying to build this feature that James is going to tell a little bit more about.
Thanks, Douwe.
Sorry,
Blythe.
I completely skipped over you.
Oh, that's all right. My name is Aaron Blythe. I'm also from NAIC. I'm an enterprise architect, so I'm in this to pair with this group.
Awesome. Great. So I'll quickly give an introduction to this feature before we start. So the feature that we're going to be working on today is the instance level license templates. I think the easiest way to explain that is to show you the way our current license templates feature works. So I've got a project here that I just created, literally just added a README and nothing else. And so often one of the first files people create is a license file. And we offer a range of different file templates, including a license file template. And so we have a list of license template types, and then we have a list of templates for that type. So I could select an MIT license, or maybe something a little different. This one. And so this makes it really easy to make sure that you're using the correct text for the license, or the standard sort of git ignore file that you're expecting, or any other sort of template. So the context for this specific feature that we're going to be building is the ability to set custom licenses. So if you're running your own GitLab instance, when this feature is finished, you'll be able to select a project and create a license folder, and then add custom licenses into that license folder. And then those licenses will appear whenever you create a new project or are trying to create a new license file in any project on that GitLab instance. So this will be really useful when you've got a range of custom license templates and you want to make sure they're always correct. So people don't have to go to some internal intranet page or some special other place and copy and paste the license file, the license text into a new license file every time. And we also hope that in the future that we'll be able to offer other types of file templates. But keeping the GitLab spirit. This is the minimum viable change, which makes it easy for anyone to contribute and means that we can iterate quickly. And I think that's sort of a summary of what the feature is going to do. Anything that you want to add, Dower?
No, I think that's it. And of course, we're going to be seeing what that means from a code perspective in the coming hour.
Yeah, great. Well, I'll stop sharing my screen and let you and Dan take over from here.
All right, Dan, can you go ahead and share your screen?
Yep. All right.
Okay. So we are using VS Code right now, but I noticed that your workspace is focused on the GDK EE directory. And since GitLab is in the gitignore for the GDK EE directory, I cannot actually browse into the GitLab directory. Or maybe I need to change my settings to show directories in gitignore. But since we're only going to be working inside the GitLab directory anyway, I suggest just like promoting that to the workspace root or however that works.
Okay.
Sorry, this has nothing to do with the feature we're building, but I cannot see the files that Dan is looking at.
It's just about the collaboration. I wonder if you, from your terminal, just launch a new code session.
Yeah, that's what I was going to
Wait, then will the collaboration still go?
Who knows?
We'll see.
Not used this much. All right, so let's see. Signing in. I will move this over here and I will share this one.
This is a pretty cool feature of VS Code that we can actually get multiple people in here to collaborate at the same time. I just learned about that from
it's interesting that
this setup.
That you don't have access to navigate through this.
I think it might be because it's in gitignore, and I guess the VS Code default settings hide directories in gitignore, and I'm browsing through my settings, but I cannot find the appropriate setting to change. I haven't used VS Code before, so right. I'm trying to find where that is.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand Zoom. How do I get out of sharing my screen?
I wonder if we think it's the gitignore thing. Can we come?
Oh yeah, maybe if you just edit your gitignore
line
file in GDK and see what happens. Yeah.
Oh, okay, let me try.
Not a bad idea at all.
Let me find it.
Should be at the top level. If we find the gitignore and just comment that out for the sake of
you can
working together.
Although I don't know if gitignore, well, I guess gitignore supports comments with a £. Ah, great. There you go. I can see the GitLab folder on the left now. This is perfect. Yes, it did work.
And funny because you can actually edit that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's cool. Okay, so we know the feature we're going to build, and we know where in the UI we'll need to be adding elements or interactions. So on the one hand, of course, we need to add an option to the admin area where the user can select what repository will be used for these global custom license templates. That is the one part of this feature. And then the other part of this feature, of course, is modifying the actual license template selector to not only include this like predetermined list we have right now that's baked into GitLab, but also to be sourced from that repository that we have designated to be the template source repository. I think the most interesting one for us to look at during this hour is the second one, but the problem is that we can only really start working on populating that dropdown once we have a repository configured in GitLab as the source for these templates. But what we can do at least is browse through the relevant files to get an idea for what changes we will need to make. Okay. So where I'd like to start is in the view where this actual license file dropdown is located right now, where that comes from. I have the path here actually. I can go and open it up. In general, in GitLab, since we have so many files, this tree is usually on the left. The best way to navigate the project is just to use fuzzy file finder, which you can just enter some words that you think will, be part of the file name, and then it will direct you to it. But for some reason, I still cannot use the fuzzy file finder to find the file I'm looking for. So what I'm going to do is just send you the path over Zoom, Dan, because I can see the GitLab directory now, but I cannot actually see those files in the fuzzy file finder. I'm not quite sure why.
Okay.
But if you could open up that file that I just sent you a link to, that would be great.
Where?
In the Zoom chat. I think you can see it there.
It's under the app folder, then views.
Oh yeah, yeah, we can do that as well.
App folder and views. Okay.
Projects.
Projects. Okay.
Blob. _ template. This is good because I think this is helping us get. We're not as familiar. It's helping us get a layout of how the project kind of fits together.
And I've I went through another issue and found a bunch of other files, so I'm probably even more lost than I would have been if I hadn't done that.
Well, I think those files you found are relevant, but actually I can, so the way that I found this file is, so like you've already found the actual file hierarchy and where files are, like of course there's a system to it, but that system can be kind of hard to wrap your head around if you're not actually someone on the GitLab team. Since I'm not on the front-end team either, I also didn't know where this file would, where these dropdowns would be defined. So what I did is in my browser, I opened the web inspector or developer tools or whatever they call them nowadays. And I used inspect element to find the drop down like little select tag. And I saw that it had a pretty unique class name, JS-license-selector. And you can actually see on line 8 that you have toggle class JS license selector there. So once I'd found that pretty unique class name, I just did a project-wide search for that string. And then of course it directed me to this file, which is where that is configured.
Oh, that's smart. That's
and
awesome.
some other places where you'll be able to find that class name is in one of those JS files that you've got open. I think the license selector JS on the very left.
Yeah.
We'll probably also have a reference. Yeah, there you go, on line 13 to that same class name. So just by looking for that selector, you can pretty easily find at least 2 of the files that are relevant to what we're doing here today. Awesome. So if we can go back to that, that template file I asked you to open up, you might want to close some of those specs and some of those other Ruby files.
Yeah.
If they're going to be relevant, we'll find them later.
Sounds good. I didn't realize how many were still open.
All right. Yes, template selectors HTML. That's the one. That's the one I want to. Yeah, there you go. Perfect. So we can see on line 8 that this is the line, apply a license template, which is also a string you would be able to find in the user interface. So this is definitely that line that generates the dropdown that licenses can be selected in. If you scroll a little bit to the right, because right now part of the file is off screen, if you scroll to the right a little bit, you see that it says data licenses for select. And for the other lines just below there, you can see git ignore names, GitLab CI YAMLs, Docker file names. So all of these are Ruby helper methods that return a hash or an array. I'm guessing in this case, it's going to be a hash of the data that dropdown will actually be populated with. So the next step is to find where is that method actually defined, the licenses for select method. So I suggest doing a project-wide search for that string and seeing where that takes us. Licenses _ for select. Yeah, there you go. You already had it selected. Okay, great. So you can see in the blob helper, there's a line that says def licenses for select. Of course, Ruby method definitions start with def. So in a lot of cases, if you know that something's going to be a method definition, you can just do a project-wide search for def followed by that name, and then it will usually take you immediately to the place where that's defined. So licenses for select. As you can see on line 183, the first thing we do is call the all method on licensee license. And licensee is the name of a gem, an open source Ruby library that we use to get information about licenses. It has a really big database of open source licenses, and that's got all kinds of details like whether it's copyright, copyleft, whether it's technically open source, whether it's not, what are your expectations from users of the software, whether it's a viral license, like if it's infectious, all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. For some of the other template types, like GitLab CI YAML, Dockerfile, we actually have a directory inside the GitLab project where we have all of these files. And if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see that method git ignore names, and you'll see a method GitLab CI YAMLs, and you'll see a method Dockerfile names. And all of these call this template class and ask it for dropdown names. And we will have a look at those classes in a bit because it is going to be relevant to what we're going to be doing with these new license templates. But you can see that these are a little bit different from the license template we currently have, which we are getting directly from the licensee gem.
Okay.
And then on line 185, what you can see is that we are storing a hash in an instance variable, and that hash has two keys, popular and other. And then the value for popular is all of those licenses that are featured. And then it will take their name and ID. And then it has on the second line other, which are all the licenses that are not featured. All of the featured licenses are rejected from this list. And then again, it will take their names and IDs. So what this method ends up returning is a hash with two keys, and each of those keys holds an array. And that array holds rows where each row represents or refers to a license, and it will have both a name and a key in there. And this happens to be exactly the information that the dropdown on the front end needs to list those categorized licenses.
I know we don't know yet, but I'm curious, like, is that defined by that Ruby gem you were talking about, or is that something that's going to be defined by people selected often, or whatever? I'm sure we'll come to the answer to that, but
it's a good question. It's actually a property inside licensee. Some of the more popular licenses, especially for open source, so then you're talking about MIT, GPL, a couple of those, they have that featured flag in their definition inside the licensee gem, so they kind of float to the top. Because of course there's a lot of licenses that are useful to have in a list like that, but are not quite as common. For our purposes, the goal I think is going to be to perhaps add a third category here, which we can just call custom for the time being. And of course, if you have custom licenses for your environment, for your organization, you probably want those to show up at the top. So where we want to end up, at least as far as this method is concerned, is to have another hash entry there, exactly right there, custom : something. And then the value of custom is going to be an array of hashes where each hash will have a name and an ID key. Of course, how we're actually going to populate that array, where we're going to get that data from, that's something we have yet to build. But yeah, it doesn't hurt to add it here as a note for the future. Yep.
Okay, so
you might want to just comment that line out though, so we don't break anything.
Like this.
Yeah, exactly. And what you can do if you open up your browser, I don't know if you are currently sharing your entire screen or just the individual VS Code window, but if you were to switch to your browser, you can also see in Web Inspector that the data attributes for that dropdown tag does indeed contain a JSON serialized representation of that hash with those arrays, with those name and ID keys. But at least now we have an idea of what we need to add here at the end.
Okay, yeah, I can't figure out how to in my Mac.
No, it's all right. I think Zoom allows you to share not just a window but a screen, but
yeah, and I didn't do that, but I can share the Chrome here.
Yeah, and
you can see. So we're not actually in one right now.
Oh yeah, yeah. We're gonna need a project. It can be an empty one. We can go ahead and create an empty project.
And so this is the GDK GitLab instance that's running.
Yeah, yeah.
For anyone who's not done this yet, it's really handy to be able to get GitLab up and running and start developing. We'll see how fast this is. Everything's running right now.
Yeah, usually it takes quite a couple tabs open. Yeah, you do.
Yeah, we should have done that on a different one.
It's okay. Usually the first page load in the GDK takes some time, but then subsequent ones should be a lot faster. Although I did just see a bunch of errors pop up in your terminal, which I can see through VS Code.
Yeah, I had backgrounded that process, but it seems like it's up again. All right, so.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's working again. Great.
Yeah, I've noticed that with Rails projects over the years. Like after I deploy something, like I usually put in like go hit a couple of URLs first.
Yep.
Because it just needs to be primed in some way.
Yeah, exactly. And in this case, since we had just made a change to that blob helper file, Rails thinks it needs to reload all of its data, although it might be we didn't actually save that file. But anyway, yeah, you can see apply a license template there, and as you can see, that it's the same string that we were seeing in that view earlier. And then indeed, if you go ahead and use the Web Inspector to, the easiest way to find that specific element is to go to right-click on it. So right-click on apply a license template on the left, and then just pick inspect. the third to last option. And then it will take you right to that file inside the document object model view over there. And then if you scroll up a little bit, you will actually see, or down, I guess. It's always confusing to say whether we should be scrolling up or down, but I want to see the data that's up from what we're currently seeing. So scroll up, there you go. This is that JSON serialized data. You can see the license information in here with those name and ID attributes I referred to earlier. So what we want to do is also surface a custom option here with whatever options we can find in that template repository. So as you can see, these licenses here only contain a name and an ID. But of course, if you were to select a license now in that license picker, which you can go ahead and do, you'll see that it will actually populate that field down there with the content of that license. But since we didn't see the content of that license on the right yet, you can ignore the red bar, by the way. That's some developer tool stuff that's not relevant right now. But you can see that you can see the license text at the bottom. And since this was not in the JSON hash, this indicates that it was loaded asynchronously. And indeed, if you go to the network tab of the web inspector on the top right, it's the fourth tab, you've got elements, console, sources, and network. You will see that the first of these three, GPL 3.0, that's the one you just selected. And if you click it, there you go. You can see in preview that this has some more information about that license, including a content key and a description key. And content is the one that you will see matches whatever just showed up over there. So we've identified the location where we can influence what options are actually listed there. That's that lob helper method. But then we also need to influence this endpoint that actually ends up returning the content. So if you switch to the headers little sub tab there on the right, just above that JSON content, you've got headers, preview, response, cookies, and timing. Yep, there you go. You can see request URL at the top, and you can see if you make this pane a little bit wider, again, it might be a little bit easier to read. You'll see that that URL starts with API/v4/template/licenses, followed by the identifier for the license that we picked. And then you can see it passes along a project and full name keys. And this is relevant because a lot of licenses have a kind of a placeholder in their content for where the company name or the year or like the person's full name or the project name should go. And we perform some automatic substitution when you request that license content, so that the license file will not just have like a full name placeholder or organization placeholder, but it will actually contain the name in question. It seems that the GPL 3.0 template was not actually updated to use those placeholders, because you can see that this says that copyright belongs to the Free Software Foundation, which in our case is probably not the case, but that's why that URL is formatted that way. So the other file we want to have a look at now, or I'd like us to have a look at, is the definition of the templates API. So if we go back to VS Code, we can use the fuzzy finder, and in this case I know, or I can just direct you there because I happen to know the path. All right, let's switch back to VS Code. Yeah, I think we're going to be in VS Code for a little bit now that we've identified those two main files where we need to be. All right, so if you open up the, if you display the tree view again on the left, you're going to want to go into the lib directory, LIB. So we want to go back to the tree view. That's the first one there. Yep, and then we're going to go into lib at the root level, top level of the, not the GDK directory, but inside GitLab. Yeah, so GitLab/lib. And then inside lib, there will be a directory called API. And inside API, there is a file called templates.rb, very near to the bottom. ST templates. Yes, there you go. In this case, the way to find this file, if you didn't know about that code organization, one way to do it could have been to look at the Rails log output and see what class ended up handling the request. Or, as I usually would have done, you can use the fuzzy finder, and if you enter something that sounds like the path or the URL that we're looking for, it will usually show you the file in question, in this case, API templates. So at the top, you can see that we have global template types, gitignore, GitLab CI YAMLs, and Docker files. So like I mentioned earlier, these are the templates that we that are stored inside GitLab that we do not use a gem for. You can find the gitignores under vendor/gitignores. The GitLab CI YAMLs will be under vendor/GitLab CI YAMLs. Same for Docker files, but then licenses are different. So if you scroll down a little bit, you will see that there is a little bit further still. You see some references to license here, but yes, this is where we want to go. So at line 50 at the very top of the page, you can see that we are about to define the API endpoint to get the list of available license templates that should be templates plural, but that's not the only typo we got in GitLab. So this is the endpoint that will return a list of all of the templates that exist in the system. So this serves a similar purpose to that licenses for dropdown method that we had a look at earlier, or licenses for selector, or whatever it's called. But then if you look at line 66, you can see a description, get the text for a specific license. And this is the API endpoint that we just saw being requested.
Okay.
As you can see on line 73, the format is templates/licenses, followed by :name. All of the path segments in these definitions that start with a colon, that indicates that it's a parameter, variable, that's a path segment that is customizable by the user. And then that name field variable will be available inside the endpoint definition by accessing params name. So you can see on line 74 that we call declared params name to find whatever name was actually provided in the path. So we end up calling licensee license find with that GPL 3.0 argument. So what we'll need to do later on is to make sure that this endpoint doesn't just return the content for actual licenses that are handled by licensee, but also that it will return the content for any licenses that we have inside that global repository. And this is another place we're gonna need to be editing. Okay. So for your own benefit, you might just also want to add a code comment here to say, this needs to be taught to return global repository licenses, or use whatever phrasing you prefer, but this is definitely a place we're gonna have to make some changes later.
Yeah, which is it in just right? Or is it?
All right, great. Let me see if there's anything else related to this that I still wanted to show. I think, yeah, okay. So now we've seen how that list is populated, and we see where it's getting the content from. So these are places we're going to need to edit later on. Okay. So now imagine that we have a repository. Imagine that the repository has already been configured at the admin area level. So we have a reference to a project model, I guess, because I imagine we'll allow the admin to select a project inside GitLab. And of course, that is the project model. And then the project model has a repository method that returns the actual repository. But basically what we want to do here is look at the contents of that repository, find any files that we know are to be license templates, and then we want to include them in this output. So like I mentioned earlier, we have these GitLab CI YAML templates, we have the Docker file templates, gitignore templates, and all of these are stored inside the main GitLab project. So that logic is not really reusable because they read from the actual disk. They don't read from inside the repository. But we have a feature in GitLab that is a little bit similar to what we're trying to do here, which are the issue templates and merge request templates. In any repository in GitLab, if you create a .gitlab directory with an issue templates directory inside that, any file you put in that directory that ends in MD for Markdown, those files will automatically be picked up, and you can select them as templates when you're creating a new issue or creating a new merge request. So they will pre-populate the description. You can use them to create a template for a bug issue or a feature request issue, etc. So this is similar functionality because it looks inside the repository looking for templates for a certain new kind of file, or in this case, issue or merge request that we're trying to create. And despite the difference between these gitignore and GitLab CI YAML templates and these issue and merge request templates, they do share some common logic building blocks because both of them are templates. And the source of that template, whether it's an actual location on disk or from inside the repository, is abstracted away. So if you look at this file, or maybe you should go back to the blob helper RB. In blob helper RB, the file we were in just a moment ago, we've had a look at licenses for select. And then if you look down there, you can see that gitignore names, GitLab CI YAML, and the Docker file names. All of these methods have a GitLab template class, and then they call the dropdown names method on that class. So I think we can have a look at gitignore's template, that class name. In most Ruby projects, the class names will be identical to the file names, except the difference being that class names will be camel cased, while file names will be so-called snake cased, so all lowercase with underscores instead of like going for small caps characters. So if you're going to look for a file called gitignore underscore template, you should be able to find it. But of course, you can also, well, now you're using project-wide search, so you're looking for that string. But what you're going to want to do is either use the fuzzy file finder, which I think you can find using Command P, or you can use for the capitalized string gitignore template. Gitignore template. Hey, there you go. That's the one at the very top. And you can see it's a Lib GitLab template. It is. I mean, these are the things that kind of keep our developers sane in a project of this size. The fact that we do have predictable file paths and everything.
If I had known about this when I first looked through it,
right? Well, I mean, that's why you got me for an hour right now to help you get up to speed with these things. And hopefully, this will be useful to anyone else who wants to contribute to GitLab who ends up watching this video, because there's definitely some interesting little helpful tools in here. So right now we're looking at the gitignore template class. You can see it defines a couple things. Extension is .gitignore, and the base there is Rails root, which is the actual root of the Rails project, which in our case is GTK/GitLab, joined with vendor/gitignore. So actually, if you were to have a look at GitLab/vendor/gitignore inside the project you have open right now, you would see a whole list of files there that all have the .gitignore extension, and you would be able to see that these map to the files you would actually see in the gitignore file selector in the user interface. Okay. And you can see the categories defined there. You can see the finder defined there. And you don't need to necessarily check out the directory, although you might just want to do it to verify that what we're looking at is what we expect. So there you go, vendor, and then you see gitignore, and then indeed you see a lot of files here, and you even see a global directory that holds some more. If you expand that global directory, you'll see it has different templates for different operating systems or for different like editors. Probably VS Code is in there as well. And all of these are exposed to the user through the gitignore template selector. So if we go back to that gitignore template class we were looking at a second ago, we will be able to see okay, let me see, where did we end up?
Where did that one go?
Oh, did we end up closing it?
Oh, maybe because I didn't edit anything. It does that.
Oh, so it's in like that. Yeah. I know what you mean.
Oh.
Gitignore template RB. Yep, recently opened. That's useful. Okay, so and you saw a moment ago that we have a global directory and a bunch of files at the root level of that GitLab or that gitignore folder, and that maps to the categories you see the final line 9. So you have two categories: languages, which maps to an empty string, which means it just refers to all files at the root level, because of course. The right-hand side of this hash are directory names. So all of the global files, the global category files will be in the global directory, and the languages category files will just be in the root directory. So not all of this is going to be directly relevant for our purposes, but at least you have an idea of what this gitignore template RB does and what kind of things are defined here. So one thing that I want to call your attention to, and that's exactly the line you have your cursor on right now, is this global template finder, which, as the name suggests, allows this gitignore template file class to find templates at the global level, where the global level is the actual GitLab installation directory. But if you look on the left inside your tree, you can see that inside the same template directory, there's also an issue template class and a merge request template class. So if we open up the issue template class, there you go, that file, you can see that it also inherits from base template. So it shares some of the same functionality of gitignore template. The finder in this case is different. It uses a repo template finder. And as the name suggests, this allows the template logic to find templates inside a repository. So on the one hand, our template is similar to the gitignore template in the sense that it is not an issue template or a merge request template. It's an actual file template. It's also similar because we're going to be defining these templates at the global level, and they're going to be accessible to any project. They're not going to be scoped to a individual project. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the Finder implementation, we are actually more interested in the repo template Finder. You can see here that it gets a couple of arguments. First of all, it gets a project. That's the project whose repository it's going to be looking inside of. In our case, we're going to pass it that project that was configured in the admin area to be the source for repositories. keys, source for templates. Base dir refers to that method defined in line 9, which in this case is called .gitlab/issue templates. Like I mentioned earlier, any issue templates can be placed inside that file, inside that directory, and then they will automatically be picked up. In our case, you can imagine that the base dir will just be an all caps license, because that's what the issue description specified. Then extension is refers to the method on line 5, which in the case of issue merge request templates is .md, because of course issue merge request templates use the markdown format, so any templates will end in .md. And then self.categories that you see on line 14 actually as you can see in this file, categories is not overridden, so this just refers to the super implementation, the base template implementation of categories, which I know returns just an empty hash, just a single hash that doesn't actually have any keys inside it. So you can see categories in line 42, exactly.
Cool.
So if there's no categories at all, then it will just take all of the files from that, in this case, .gitlab/issue templates directory, and list them without any category headings. So this is, so in our case, we would either do the same and pass nothing because we want to pick up all of the files that are inside license, or maybe at some point we would like dynamically define categories, subcategories the user might want to use, but all of that's out of scope for now. So what we are going to need to do is create a new license template class inside this template directory, and then write something similar to this, and then ensure that by the time that we call it, we don't just pass it to project that the user is currently creating a file in, but we pass it to the globally configured template repository project. So I'm gonna show you one more thing, because if you have a look at that blob helper method, you can see the blob helper. Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead and add it to make sure we don't forget about this file. Yeah, you're not going to want to create that class inside the same file, because like I mentioned in Ruby, every class is supposed to have its own file, but it will be at the same file hierarchy level, and it will be named after the class you're going to be creating.
Okay. You can go ahead and create the new file.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can go ahead and create that. We can just like copy paste it in there and make those changes we already discussed a moment ago. So new file, and I would suggest calling it license_template.rb to match the existing pattern. And then if you go ahead and copy paste the contents of issue template in there.
So if you want to switch between files, Dan, if you use Control Tab, I think that's what we probably wanted before when we were trying to get back to just the previous file.
Oh, Control Tab?
Yeah. Then you just...
Oh, I see.
You'll switch to your most recent one you had open. And that might help us if we get into another one of the situations where we're opening a bunch of files.
Okay.
Good points. Okay, so one thing I spot is that the indentation has been messed up. We use double space indentation, no 4 spaces, no tabs. This is kind of a holy war, but we made a decision and we're going to stick with it. And we expect our contributors to do the same. And in general, in Ruby projects, that's what you'll find. So on the bottom right of your screen, it says spaces 4, and I suggest changing that to spaces 2. And then it might even have an option to fix the indentation, but I just so put it on 2, and then you're gonna want to dedent everything except for the first line, so it's at the right level again. Okay, perfect. So now of course we can go ahead and rename that class name to actually be license template. Yep, we know that the base dir is just going to be license in all caps. I mean, I don't necessarily think it needs to be in all caps, but that's what the issue specifies. So let's just go with that for now. And then judging by how that earlier file base dir was defined, it needs to end in a slash as well. License / because an issue template we did the same. Okay. And then of course we got an extension. You can see, yeah, exactly, issue template /. On line 6 we got an extension. Licenses are usually not in markdown format. So I guess either we can say licenses are just plain text files, so we use the .txt extension. And it might be possible to skip specifying an extension at all, but I don't know if the code that ends up using the extension handles an empty string well. So I think for right now, what we can say is we just say all license templates need to end in .txt, which I think is acceptable to most people. And then later on, we might want to investigate whether an extension is necessary at all.
Does the base class?
Sorry, go ahead.
Does the base class have an extension?
I think the base template doesn't define one, but as you can see in line 14, we pass the extension along to the repo template finder. So it might be the repo template finder that is not sure what to do when it gets an empty extension. It might
Fair enough.
expect it to contain something.
And there was a comment in the issue about requiring at least some kind of extension, and I think because we didn't want a directory of extensionless files.
Oh yeah, good point. Yeah, then we can just go with .txt.
Yeah, and James referenced TXT, so I think I don't think we want to spend time arguing about it.
Fair enough.
Perfect. Then let's just stick with .txt.
I think it was covered already.
Okay,
so
great.
I'm good with that too. I wasn't sure if MD would be better or not, but TXT sounds good to me.
Yeah, I don't think MD is appropriate. I think it would either be .txt or no extension at all. Just like license files, obviously, often are just /license. They don't actually have an extension, but .txt should be fine. One other requirement that was listed in the issue description was that this TXT extension should be stripped when these names are actually surfaced to the user. And fortunately, that is behavior that we get for free from the base template and repo template finder. So we don't need to do anything special for that, because of course we've wanted the same behavior with gitignore templates and all of these other files. So this is pretty much what this would look like. This project you see referenced on line 14 is actually a project that can be passed to the initialize method for the base template, and then it's passed along down to this. Well, as you can see on line 13, it is an argument to this method here. But if you have a look at base template on the left, and if you have a look at how it uses that project variable that it passes on to Finder, let me check. You can see, for example, on line 63 that Finder is passed a project, which is actually in a method argument on line 61. Then if you look at where we call by category, which will be elsewhere in this file. Okay, let me see. Yeah, where do we use by category in this file? By underscore category. Line 81, you can see the drop-down names also takes a project. Yeah, that makes sense. But this is something that we can look into later. But that project will need to be that globally configured project. So if we look at blob helper RB again, the third file in the tab bar that we have open right now.
The which one?
Blob helper, BLOB helper. There you go. Yeah, you can see that we call drop-down names on this gitignore template class. And this drop-down names method is provided by base template, and it is also available now on our license template class that we just defined. So if you call drop-down names on license template, you'll need to provide a project, which in our case is going to be this globally configured template repository, and then drop-down names will return exactly the data that the view that we were looking at earlier used. Because if you recall, the view used those gitignore names helper and the other helper methods to populate the selector. Yeah, I think we've since closed the view. It was something like, let me check what the name was.
Oh, here
template selectors.html. Yeah, there you go. So you can see it passes data, gitignore names. And as we've seen a second ago, gitignore names is just a helper method that effectively directly returns the result of dropdown names, which means that with our new license template class, if we were to pass the right project along and call dropdown names on it, it will be returning exactly the data that the template selectors need to populate their selector. So this format is, as you can see here, an array of items where each item will have a name. And yeah, exactly. If it has categories, it will have one level at the top again where it has those category names. That matches what we saw a moment ago, also in Blob Helper, with those featured and other categories for licensed files. So dropdown names will, if categories are configured for the file in question, then dropdown names will return a hash with category names where each category name refers to an array of individual templates. If no categories are configured, then it will just return that array. So we are not going to, if you have a look at our license template, RB, you can see that we are currently not defining any categories, which means that we would be getting an array of dropdown names, of template names, an array of hashes where each hash will have a name key that refers to the name of an individual template. That's what that method will be returning. Okay. So if you look at blob helper RB, again, we can find that method that is currently used to populate the license dropdown, which is licenses for select. Yeah, there you go. So what we can do here, for example, is merge this license templates that we get from licensee, merge these with the data that we get from the new license template class that it pulls from that repository. So what we need to do is have licenses for select, return a hash that contains all of those licenses, whether they come from the license CGEM or whether they come from our license repository. So since we were discussing a moment ago to call this custom, what we could go ahead and do is uncomment this line. So that just says custom : and then of course the value of custom is going to need to be an array with name and ID attributes. And like I mentioned, that is exactly what we get from license template.dropdown names. So what you might want to try, this is not going to work right ahead because we haven't actually configured a global repository yet. But the value for this custom category is basically going to be the return value of that dropdown names method, which does return a list of array names. Does that make sense? I know I'm going pretty fast, but
yeah, so
that's how we need to kind of combine this information. So yeah, exactly.
All of this with the license template. Oh, shoot. I'm not sure what happened. I pasted something on accident. And then we have license template.
Exactly, .dropdown names. All right, and one thing we saw a second ago
on that line.
Yeah, there's going to be a comma at the end, and of course the little array that you have at the front there needs to go as well for this to be valid syntax. We did see a second ago that dropdown names needs a project argument in this case because it needs to know, of course, where it should be getting that data from, which we'll need to pass here. And what we can do for the moment, what we might want to do for the moment is hard code this. So the project that you just created then, do you remember what you called it? Yeah, live stream. Of course, it will have a namespace as well, which I'm guessing is your username. So then it would be like dbarker/livestream or whatever your username ended up being. If you're using the default root account, then it could just be root/livestream.
Yeah, I think it was just root. So it's
root.
Okay. Is that
root/livestream? Yeah, there you go. So this won't work actually because dropdown names doesn't expect a string name for a project. It expects an actual project object that has already been, received from the database, looked up to the database, perhaps based on a path or based on an ID that's stored in the database somewhere, something like that. Okay. So what we can do right now, just to kind of make this work, okay, let's start by adding a comma to the very end of the line, as was suggested a second ago, to make the syntax valid again. At the very end of the line, you'll want to have a comma.
Wait, a comma at the end of the line?
Yeah, just a comma, just to make a valid syntax.
Yep.
And now we're going to write a line of code to actually find the project with that path. And the way we do that, I suggest adding a new line there. You can just say like project equals, because we're going to assign it into a variable. Project, yeah, exactly. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use the project model, which has a capital P, exactly. And then this project model will have a method called find by full path with underscores. Find underscore by underscore full underscore path. Full path, FULL underscore path. Yeah, there you go. Exactly. And then if you give this method an argument, a string argument of root/livestream, then it will actually return the right project for you. It will look it up in the database based on its full name, and it will return that object. And this project variable is exactly what we want to be passing to project names. To dropdown names is what I meant. Yep, there you go. So there's one other thing to realize here, which is that currently we are, okay, let me see, that's what I'm saying. No, I guess this is okay. So now if we were to save this file and reload the new file page in your browser, we probably wouldn't see anything different. But then if we were to add a couple new files to that root/livestream project, we might already see new options show up there. So I suggest switching back to your browser just to see this work.
Yeah, and it looks like I'm getting an error, but I will switch over to the other screen or make this an easier screen to use. Let's see, we'll do desktop 3. And
I'm looking at your editor again. Okay, cool. I can see you switch between windows now.
I'm gonna
perfect.
Here.
Yeah.
Okay. Undefined repository for nil class. Okay. Right, there you go. That means that it calls repository on nil. And in fact, what the repo template finder does is it calls repository on whatever we just passed as a project. But it's in the case that the project is nil, which indicates that we could not find the project. And actually, if you look into your browser again, you will see that the full path for the project we just created is actually dan/livestream, not root/livestream.
Okay.
So we're going to need to change it there. And then we can reload the page. And then it will take a few more moments to load because it needs to reload the files in the back. All of the changes needs to apply those to the in-memory cache of classes and objects that Ruby and Rails maintains. And then we see it load. So now if we expand that apply a license template option, we see at least an empty custom category.
Yeah.
Nice.
Which is some kind of accomplishment. So now I want to see if this actually works. What happens if we create a license directory, and if inside that license directory we add any file with a .txt extension? Because that's of course what it's going to be looking for right now. So yeah, let's do that inside dan/livestream. Actually, we're already on the new file page. So what you can do is, or we can create the directory first. It doesn't really matter.
Oh, because we need to.
You can actually create a directory from here immediately. So if in file name you type license in all caps / whatever.txt, or whatever we want to use as our test license.
Awesome.
Yeah, test.txt, that's the trick. It does need to end in txt because of what we just defined. And then if you enter some text there and go ahead and save it,
okay.
With a little bit of luck, it would already show up in that license selector.
Hopefully I don't get in trouble for that one.
Commit changes. This is taking an awful long time. But okay, it was created. So now let's go ahead and see what happens if we try to add a license. Let's see if this new test shows up under custom. If it does, we can be very proud of what we've accomplished here. Okay, so there it is. Okay, but now you'll see that you clicked it and now it didn't work because we haven't updated that API yet. Remember that we were talking about the API that it actually uses to get the content? And you can see on the right, it says that it was not found. And you can actually see that it inserted undefined into the path rather than what we perhaps were expecting test. And the reason for this is that if you look at what we have in blob helper RB. So let's go back to our code in a second. You'll see that popular and other, they map over all of those licenses and then they return hashes that have both name and ID keys. But as we saw a moment ago, dropdown names only returns an array of hashes that have a name key. As you can see on line 82, and this is also in the example on line 75, it returns only a name. So we don't actually have an ID. So we could resolve this using either of two approaches. We could manipulate that array by adding an ID key to every hash in the array, just copying over whatever was in name. That might be the easiest way to go about it. Or we can make the front-end JavaScript implementation a little bit smarter and teach it that if there is no ID, it should just use the name as, instead of the ID. It should just insert the ID. It should just insert the name in the URL. But I think that the easiest thing might be to map this dropdown names array and manipulate every hash inside there by also setting their IDs. So yeah, we're gonna use map. And then we're gonna open a block, which we can do using curly braces. Like closing curly brace. Yeah, exactly. So that's where we're gonna use the argument name, which I guess can just be like template. You're already writing it, perfect. You can use a T, for example, or just template. Yeah, whatever. It doesn't really matter all that much. But usually when you have like a whole map block that you're defining on the same line, using short variable names makes it a little bit easier to read. Because otherwise the line gets so wide. And you really should only be using map blocks on a single line if you know the content of them is going to be simple anyway. So then a simple single variable should be enough. So yeah, we need definitely to close it. And now as the name, I guess we're going to just copy over the name from T. So we're going to do T. So, okay, so a T is a hash, and hashes need to be, hash values need to be addressed using square brackets, just like you can see on line 203,
Yep.
where we're reading params context. So you'll need to use T and then opening square bracket, colon name, and then a closing square bracket.
Okay. Yep. Gotcha.
Right.
And then this
You colon and then, yeah, exactly. And then closing it there. And then for ID, we're just going to use the exact same thing, T name. Yeah, and we're going to need a colon in front of name because otherwise it's going to look for a variable called name, which doesn't exist at this point. So we can go ahead and save this and
a comma at the end again.
Yeah, good point.
good call.
Yeah. So if we go to the browser now, we'll see something change. We'll see that it will probably still fail because we haven't actually not updated the API, but it will fail differently. Right now, the page is still loading. The loading indicator you see right now is from the previous time that we issued this action.
So it should enter.
Okay, let's select test.
Yeah,
Okay, so now it at least managed to put test in the URL, but then of course the API doesn't know about these new repo templates yet, so it's still returning a 404. So I think for the last thing in this hour we can do is go and have a look at that API definition that we were looking at a moment ago, which is an API/templates RB. You have it on the very end, like the second to last tab that you have open. You scroll right a little bit. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so you can see that this is the endpoint that we're looking at. Right now, it just calls licensee license find using that name param. And then, of course, it will not be able to find tests. So it just returned not found license, which is a 404 HTTP status. But what we want to do is we want to, I guess, first check whether that name exists as a custom license. And only if it doesn't, then we fall back on seeing if it exists as an actual licensee license. If you scroll down a little bit in this file, you will see on line 81 that it iterates over global template types. And you might remember that further up in the file, you can scroll back up to the top, we define global template types as a hash. It's at the very top of the file. Yeah, there you go. As a hash with gitignore, GitLab CIML, and Docker files, and it defines a class there, gitignore template, GitLab CIML template, Docker file template. All of these three template types are also available over the API. So you can request API/templates/gitignores, and it will return you that list. And you can do API/templates/gitignore/name of a specific gitignore file, and it will return you the content. And that is similar to what we want to do here. So if you look,
is this what we're using when we grab, like VS Code fetches down here? You can see it's fetching the GitLab CI templates. Is that what it's grabbing? Is it hitting this API?
I imagine that it is. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Is that I imagine that's not a built-in VS Code thing. Is it an extension or a plugin?
Yeah, it's a plugin so that I can do basically what I do in the GUI on GitLab.
Oh, perfect.
I do it in VS Code, so it'll just give me the template for auto DevOps or whatever.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's probably using that very endpoint. So if you scroll down a little bit again, where you can see that global template types used on line 81, you can see that we are iterating over it. And like you saw a second ago, it was actually a hash where template type would have been, for example, GitLab CIMLs, and then properties would be a hash with some more information. And you can see on line 92 that we actually define templates/template type, which in this case would be templates/gitignores, to get all of those available templates. And then inside that class, you can see it uses the class with a K variable, which in this case would refer to that GitLab template, gitignores template, or GitLab CIMLs template class that we saw a moment ago. We'll call it all method, and the all method will return an array of all of those templates that exist in the system. And if you scroll down to 104, you can see that that is the API endpoint to return an individual template. Okay. So you can see that again, it has that dynamic segment template type, which in this case will evaluate to GitLab CIMLs. And then name is that argument or that kind of parameter path segment that the user can specify. And that is surfaced as params name on line 105. And then you can see it's calling find on class, where class is again that GitLab CIML template class with that name param. So what we want to do is something similar, but we want to use the license template. So what we want to do is basically the exact same thing you see happening in line 105 through 107, which is it will call the find method on the class, which in our case is license template. It will pass along that name argument, and then it will return a template object. And if it returns a template object, then we want to use that render response helper on line 107 to actually return the data to the user. And if the template cannot be found in the repository, then I guess we want to fall back on the licensee behavior. So what I suggest doing is just copy pasting those 3 lines, and then copying them here and then pasting them in that license method at the top here. And then we're going to need to make some changes to make sure that this actually works. So on the one hand, okay, class. We know what class is. Class, once again, is that GitLab template, license template class we've been using.
Let's see.
The one we just defined a few moments ago.
This one? That would be...
And then it's license template, yeah.
Okay, that find.
Yeah, we are very close to the hour, but I'd like to spend like 1 more minute to get this working so that we have a POC. And then of course you can look into like the configuration at the admin level and all of that stuff. But then at least you've seen all the relevant parts to get this working. I hope you're okay going over by a few minutes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that's fine.
Perfect. Cool. Yeah, so this looks right. And then of course it's taking that name. And then if there is actually a template with that name, it will return it here. One thing you might notice is that we're not actually passing along the project this time. And that is something that we need to fix because as we've seen, the license template needs a project to know where to find those templates. So what I suggest doing is having a look at the base template definition, 1 tab to the left, and seeing if that find method supports a project, and if so, where that argument should be provided. Great, it supports a second argument, which would be the project. So then I suggest copy pasting that same line that we used to look up the project in blob helper.
Yeah.
The one where we looked it up by name. Of course, this is hard coding. This is not how it's going to work at the end, but this is good for now. Yeah, copy paste that whole line. Yeah. So copy paste this whole line. We're going to use it in the API as well. Of course, you know, the feature is not going to have that Dan/livestream live coded there, but we can try this now. So you're passing on the project. That's great. So if there is a new template, we want to go ahead and say render response. And then if there is not a template, then we want to go back to the old behavior. So I guess we can say if new template, this line, and then else, and then the code we had a moment ago.
Wait, so we want this line if there's
yeah, if there's a new template, so if new template, that'll work.
Can we just put if new template at the end of that line? Or...
well, the thing is that we want to
else,
not continue. Yeah, exactly. We need the else branch. So if new template this stuff, and then we can say else, and then we can indent all of the other stuff. Including that present line, all of it, yeah, that line as well. Indented ones and add end at the end. Okay, so the render response call that we're making on line 76 takes a template type argument, which or a variable that we currently haven't specified. But this template type is that like GitLab CIMLs or git ignores thing that was defined at the top. So in our case, you can just provide :licenses. :licenses. Yes, there you go.
Do we want to provide that at all, or?
So if you were to add it to the global template type method, then it's going to be used on line 86 here to dynamically define those APIs. And then it's going to dynamically define an API that allows you to look up a list and look up those templates. But that is without the special licensee behavior we have. If we were only to have licenses in this configured repository, then that would work. But since we want to have the license stuff, the licensee gem to fall back on, we need to have our own endpoint definition.
And this was related to this global template finder type behavior where it's global.
Let me see. Yeah, the global template type behavior, because it's global, because it's getting this data from inside the GitLab source code, like in that vendor directory we saw earlier, we can dynamically define those APIs because we know exactly where to get their data. And then the dynamically defined API that you see down in this file will just call .all or .find, and it doesn't need to know a specific project to look in. Okay. But right now we have this fallback behavior we're looking for, where we will return, where we'll first see if the license template exists inside the repository, and otherwise it will fall back on licensee. So let's go back to the browser and see if this works. And if it works, then I think we can call this our success. If it doesn't, I'm guessing it's a success still, but then I'll be a little bit disappointed in ourselves. Yeah, because of course now the page is reloading. This will take a few seconds, and then let's select test and let's see what happens. Okay, that's so the request. Oh, it's still pending. It's still loading. It's just taking its sweet time.
There it goes.
Oh,
It worked. That's amazing. It took us an hour and 5 minutes, and the first 5 minutes were lost with some VS Code troubles. So we did it in an hour. This is amazing.
it's always worth it to wait for beer, huh?
Yeah.
Right? All right, great work. James, did you want to wrap this up somehow? You've re-enabled your camera, I see.
Sure. I guess I just want to say thanks, Dan and Aaron, for contributing and working with us on this feature, and looking forward to working with you on the issue and on the merge request once you open a merge request. And for anyone watching, we'll be having a follow-up call to do a code review and go through the final process of getting the merge request merged. And I think Dan's going to be doing some further live streams to share his progress on this feature.
Yeah, Aaron and I will do some live streams on DevOps KC YouTube channel. So catch us there over the next couple of weeks before our follow-up with you guys. And we'll be coding this the rest of the way and adding tests and all the other things to make sure the merge request gets through.
Amazing. I'm looking forward to reviewing it and, of course, watching the live streams with you coding. And if there's anything you need, of course, you know where to find us on the issue and through other channels.
Awesome.
Right.
Thank you.
We really appreciate
the help.
A lot of fun.
Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks,
cheers.
Dan.
Have a great rest of your day.
Have a great day.
Cheers.
Bye.